I had a request from Cheryl to come up with some wire wrapping techniques, and here I've got herringbone, diagonal, pillar, briolette, halo, freestyle and multiple bead wrap. So let's start with herringbone. Herringbone bead wrap is a very delicate and very pretty wrap, and you can use any size bead. I'm using 0.8 as my stem wire, and then I'm wrapping with 0.4 millimeter wire. So I'm going to start off by making a centralized link on my 0.8 20 gauge stem wire. And then I'm going to get my thinner wrapping wire, the 24 gauge, the 0.4 millimeter, and I'm going to start wrapping it around just under that loop, that centralized link that I have made. So you want to wrap it tight and scooch it together so that it sits neatly together. Trying to get the focus, but you can see what I'm doing. I'm just wire wrapping around the stem. So you do that really for the length that you want the herringbone weave to be on each side of the bead. I'm just going to cut this off the spool because it's getting in my way. So I've cut a long length, about a arm's length of the 0.4, and I'm going to wrap about 10 millimeter, a centimeter or so, just under maybe, of the stem, just under that link. So use up, don't leave any wire at the top, otherwise it just gets in your way. So neaten that up at this stage. And yeah, it's about a centimeter, 10 millimeters. So get that ready, and then you're going to introduce the bead onto the stem wire. To start the weave, you bring the wire around the side of the bead, wrap it around once, and then over to the other side of the bead to completely frame it, and again around the top of the bead. And then again you repeat this, but you bring that wire behind the first wire. So you're continually going behind, and then a complete wrap, and then again behind the first one, and a complete wrap, and you keep repeating this pattern, and you will build up this weave. So can you see I'm going round and around? I'm keeping it tight, and it goes to the back of the bead. Here it is, wrapped around, and you can see I've now finished my wire, and I've cut off the excess end. Now I'm going to cut the stem wire. I don't need so much. I could either make a link here and then suspend something from this, but I've decided not to have anything dangling from my earrings. So I'm just going to hammer the very end, taking care not to hammer any of that weave, otherwise I'll have ruined it. So I'm flattening and spreading just the end, and then I'm going to fold it to the back of the earring. So it just sits and squashes down and flattens at the back. You of course could have made a headpin, or you could have made a spiral, or you could have made a link. And then if you want it as earrings, like I've decided to have them, just link it onto ready-made ear wire and you're ready to go. And those are very decorative earrings and quite detailed. So you can do that with any size bead of your choice. The next one is the diagonal wrap. This is the one I probably use the most. It's just one wrap around the bead, and it's very effective. It just gives a glimpse of metal. So I'm going to show you on these green beads with a bit of 0.8 copper wire. So again, thread the bead, create a centralized link on the stem wire, and you want to leave a little gap, and the way you can do that between the link is to bend it, leaving a gap before you make your next link. There's a little bit of a space there, and that gives me space to wrap around once, bring it across the bead, and wrap around at the opposite end to secure. Snip it off and neaten the end. And that gives that lovely sort of swirl across the bead. Just a very simple bit of decoration made out of one bit of wire. If it's a bit loose, give it a little twist in the middle, and that will give it a little bit of shape, and it will tighten it and make it hug better on the bead. So you can see it again, centralized link at one end of the bead, push the bead up to that link, bend it, leaving a gap, wrap it around, make one wrap under that link, bring it across to the opposite side, the other link, and wrap and secure. So you can see if you're making a necklace, how quickly this would go, because you just get into this lovely rhythm of wire wrapping each of the beads. And make sure the links are all running in the same direction. And then you can turn them into earrings, as I said, necklaces, as you can see, bracelets, and so forth, and any size bead will work for this. Next is the pillar wrap. The pillar wrap is actually very, very similar to this diagonal wrap. It's just round and round, a longer bead. So when I say pillar wrap, it's just going to be a long bead. So you make the centralized link. I'm using 0.8 again. And then I'm bringing it from the base and wrapping it around, because it's such a long bead, and back up to the top to secure it. So you often get longer shaped beads. It doesn't have to be this shape, but any long bead this will work for. Sort of a tubular bead, a long oval bead, anything like that. So again, create a centralized link with your 0.8. Leave a little gap, and you can do that by folding the wire back. Can you see I'm leaving a gap? Because I need, after I've wrapped it round the bead, I need to come and wrap it just under the link at the top, and I need a tiny space there to do that wrap. And then obviously neaten up the cut end. And if you need to just adjust it a bit, and if it's a bit loose, you can tweak it and tighten it. So this works really well for anything that isn't round. And say an oval glass bead like this, that can become a really nice pendant. So a focal pendant bead works well. So this time I'm going to show you with a link at each end. So I've made my centralized link, then I bend it, leaving a space, make a wrapped link on the other side. So I'm doing my wrap already. Then wire wrap around the surface of the bead as many times as you wish, and secure it at the opposite end, just under the top link. Cut it off and neaten the ends. And as you can see, any size bead would work. And you can twist and tweak it to tighten it. And you could hang a tassel off it and make a lovely pendant on a chain or a cord. So that's the pillar wrap. Next one is the briolette wrap. So a briolette bead is a teardrop pear-shaped bead. It's usually top drilled, and often it is a gemstone which is faceted. But any sort of top drilled teardrop bead will work for this. So I'm using 0.6 millimeter because it's a smaller drilled hole, and I'm going to thread the top drill, cross it over where it meets at the top of the bead, and then I'm going to hold that crossover area, straighten out the longer stem wire, that's going to be my stem wire, and then use the short end to wrap once around the stem wire and cut it off. I don't want too many wraps there because I'm going to use another wire to wrap over that, so I don't want it too bulky on that area. So I'm not using the 0.6 for the wire wrapping. I could do, but it's much harder to keep it even. So I'm using thinner 0.4 again, lovely soft binding wire, and I'm going to attach the end where I've wrapped it, right to the top, and then I'm going to wrap and wrap around that wire top that I've just created, and I'm going to continue wrapping until I cover the wire that's coming out of the top drilled holes from my teardrop bead. And once I've done that, I want to secure it by bringing it back across to the top and securing it back at the top. And then cut it off, and cut off any of the other wires that are still projecting. So neaten it all up at the top. And if there are any gaps between your wire wraps, just spend some time scooching them all up and neatening it a little bit. So it's very much like a bead cap, and it just hides where the drilled wire is, you know, where the top drilled holes are. And then of course you want to make a top link, and I'm doing that by doing a wrapped loop with the stem wire coming out. This was the stem wire was 0.6 because it's a gemstone bead and I've got to use thinner wire. If I had a chunky big teardrop briolette, I could use 0.8 as my main structure wire, and then still wrap in the fine wire. So there you have it. Next is a halo bead wrap, which is a very simple thing to do, but it is very effective on a plain bead that you want to show off. Maybe something like a pearl that has lots of opalescence on it. Again, this works for any size bead. I'm going for a, it's sort of, I'd say it's an 8mm bead. So I'm using my bail makers, but you can use a pencil or a pen just to make a little bit of a sort of rounded shape to push your bead into. So if you had a smaller bead, you'd use your round nose pliers, the end of your round nose pliers, and you push that shape into the side of the bead. You want it to come up around the bead. If it's too long, you can always snip a bit off. And here I'm just going to snip a tiny bit off, but really it's not that necessary. And now on the same direction, I'm bringing the wire, pushing it around just next to that bit of wire that curves around. So there's no head pin. The head pin is really the wire that's clutching or hugging the half of the bead. And you push it tightly around the circumference of the bead, and even go past the bead hole before you cut it off, because you want to have enough to make a link. So you leave just enough projecting to create a link that will sit around the top of that bead hole. So using your round nose pliers, pick up the end of the projecting wire and roll it around the pliers until it sits central at the top of the bead where the bead hole is. So it's always best to leave a little bit too much projecting, and you can just curl it and curl it round till it reaches the right position, because you just don't want too little, otherwise the bead will sit, you know, sort of will hang a little bit in a wonky way. So that really is it. Just make sure it's nice and strong, so you flatten it and squidge it. And you can see why I call it a halo bead wrap, because it goes all around the bead and surrounds it like a halo, and it just frames it and says, look at me. So if you want to make that into a pair of earrings, you just link it onto a jump ring. I've put mine on some chains. This is great again to hang off necklaces, if you want beads to come down, if you want to hang them off charm bracelets, key rings, you name it. It just gives a finish to the bead and says, look at me. So that's the halo bead wrap. The next one is what I call the freestyle wrap. I'm going to show it to you as done on a nugget bead. So this is a bead that is really, it's quite chunky, and it's, you know, just like a rough nugget. Here's a bit of rose quartz. It is drilled, as you can see, and as it's got quite a large hole, I'm going to make a wrap loop. So I'll bring it round my pliers, push the end of the wire to wrap under the loop I've just made on my pliers, and I can use my chain nose pliers just to sort of straighten the stem and do a bead wrap with the end. So wrap it to secure, and that means that that link won't open. Push the bead right up to the wrap, and now you want to leave a gap again because you're going to need it. So I'm making a space, then making another wrapped link and wrapping it round. And can you see how loose that nugget is between those two links? I want it loose because I'm going to be wire wrapping and I need to come back to the top and the base to keep securing it. So because this is such a strange shape, it's not a regular shape, I'm going to be wrapping, then coming up to the top to secure, then wrapping around, and then I just keep going backwards and forwards as many times as I want to. This works very well, as I say, for a very uneven bead like this, or something that is not sort of so beautiful to look at because you don't mind covering it in wire. Yeah, I wouldn't do it to a beautiful gemstone that is, you know, beautifully cut and faceted because you want to show that off. But something that's very rough like this, it works well. So once you finish wrapping and you think that's enough, you could always make a little spiral with the end, but I'm trying to avoid doing spirals this time. It's all about bead wraps. So just finish it off, secure it around the top again, cut off the excess, and then you're going to squish away just to make sure there's no spiky end protruding. So this sort of nuggety type bead is great for key rings or big chunky statement necklaces on cords. And if any of the wraps feel a little bit loose, especially as it's an irregular shape, it might sort of not lie very tightly or hug the nugget too well. So go around just twisting and tweaking any of the wires that look a little bit loose, and this will just tighten and tighten and tighten it all around and create a really nice firm wrapped parcel around the nugget bead. And then just make sure adjusting everything and so that it looks neat and tidy. So you could hang something off there and create what you want with that. Now the previous one I made, which was actually a sea glass bead, so this is like glass, I'm going to show you what you can do if you don't want the loop at the bottom. So you just want a flat base like a head pin. I'm just undoing the link, and if you've wrapped it, obviously you'll have to cut it, and then turn it into a little spiral, very tight spiral, and flatten it at the base of the nugget, because you don't always want a loop at each end. Sometimes you just want a head pin at one end and a link at the other, so it's just nothing's hanging off it. And so that's how you do that. I'm not hammering it hard, obviously, I'm just flattening it down. You could actually put it on your steel block and push it down as well. Anything just to flatten it against the base. And that's all it is. So you could put this on a chain and it would look great as a pendant. And there you go. And I think the other one, the rose quartz, could look quite nice as a key ring. Continuing on with the freestyle wrap, I'm using a bead this time. This is 0.8mm and it's an 8mm bead, and I'm making a central link. I've threaded it through, made a central link on one side of the bead, then bent the wire around, creating a space, then bringing the wire around again to make a second link. And that, as you can see, has given me a space between those two links, so that the bead is actually quite loose on the stem. Do you see how loose it is? But it gives me a bit of space on the top and base of the bead to wire wrap. So I'm going to use, because it's a smaller piece to wire wrap, I'm using 0.6mm wire. So I'm attaching it on one side just under the link, bringing it around and around in a very freestyle way. And every time I go around the bead, then I come back and secure it at the top, and then at the base, and then at the top, and at the base. And I wrap it as much as I want. You know, it's really up to you how much you want to cover it. This is very, very freestyle, as you can see, and organic, but it can look very effective. So I used to call it a parcel wrap bead. It's like just getting a piece of string and just wrapping it, you know, around something. So now I'm doing the tweaking, which is the little twist which tightens the wraps. You see how freestyle that is. So once again, threading it on the thicker wires, so that gives it strength. That's 0.8mm, 20 gauge, making a centralized link at one end, cutting it off, centralized link on the other end, but making sure that there's a bit of a space between those two links. I want a little bit of a space, so I've got a space to come backwards and forwards and secure the 0.6 wrapping wire. Now, if you were wire wrapping a smaller bead than this, I would wire wrap it with 0.4mm or 0.5 or even 0.3. So the smaller the bead, the thinner gauge wire you'll use to wire wrap it, because otherwise you're going to find it very hard to wrap around and, you know, secure it. And also it will take up too much room at the top and the base. So this was 0.6mm. And I'm just making sure that my two links are going in the same direction, and then I go around tightening all those little loose wires, and it also makes it means that it won't ever budge. It's secure in that bead wrap. So that's the freestyle version, which looks lovely with you know, on earrings or anything like that. Here's another variation. And lastly, the multiple bead wrap. So that means if you want to put a few beads on one stem, so there I'm going to wrap with 0.6 again. If I had bigger beads, I'd probably use 0.8. And I'm wrapping around each bead and then securing just under the bead until I get to the last one. So depending how many beads, and then push them all right down on the stem. So this is a ready-made head pin that I've picked out, which makes it nice and simple. If you don't have a ready-made head pin, make your own head pin, maybe with a little spiral at the end. Now that, I could stop there, but if you want to do both sides, you just carry on bringing the wire back up and around the side of each bead, securing it at the top and bottom, and that surrounds the bead, and then you cut it off at the top. So you can make these multiple bead wraps any length that you want, any size beads that you want. If it's very chunky, you could use the 0.8, and if it's very tiny crystals and small beads, you could use thinner wires. There are no rules, as I've always keep saying. I mean, I experiment a lot, and I've found that if I don't have it to hand, I can make it work with something else. It's a bit like cooking, you know, you look in your fridge and you haven't got quite the right ingredients for I don't know, the dish that is you want to make, but you make your own variation. So never worry that you haven't got everything that I'm showing you. If you've got a bit of wire and you've got some beads, just give it a go with what you've got. So this is the second one, as you can see. I'm just neatening up the end, and then I'm bringing it round again to finish off the other side. So I'm sure there are plenty more bead wraps as well as all the ones I've shown you, but these are the ones that come to mind that I've been teaching for many years, and I hope that this has inspired you to start making your own versions. So thank you so much for watching.